You can weave that into an answer explaining why this woman from the IMF is talking about a new Bretton Woods. I'm sure you've seen a bunch of stories pop up in the last week or two. Is there an IMF reset coming? I know Lynette Zhang has been talking about that. So what's going on there? Hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for Arcadia Economics. And of course, it is the time for the physical silver and gold market update with Andy Schectman of Miles Franklin at this exciting time in the world. Yes, I don't know, maybe every time is exciting if you have the right perspective, but certainly with the election circus that's going on. And Andy, we're going to cover some of these new IMF announcements. I don't know if it's an announcement, but anytime an IMF official is talking about a new Bretton Woods, well, quoting John Maynard Keynes, I can't help myself and it's not bring you on and giggle at it a little bit. So we will dig in, but more importantly than all that silver and gold and all that other stuff, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Chris. You know, it was a little startling to wake up to 6 inches of snow here in Minnesota, the earliest I've ever seen it in my life. Kind of icing on top of a crap 2020 cake. But what are you going to do? You know, this whole year is about making do and adjusting and rolling with the changes. So here we go, another change. Winter's already here in Minnesota.
Well, I appreciate how you respond to those things with some powerful metaphors, as always. Last week you were talking about ice cream sundaes. Maybe you'll work in my favorite this week about being a one-legged cowboy at an ass-kicking contest. If you can weave that into an answer explaining why this woman from the IMF is talking about a new Bretton Woods, I'm sure you've seen a bunch of stories pop up in the last week or two. Is there an IMF reset coming? I know Lynette Zhang has been talking about that. So what's going on there? And again, bonus points if you get a good metaphor in the answer. That's what silver investors love.
Absolutely, brother. Well, first of all, you know, I'm going to dig back up something that I've really probably buried into the ground by talking about it so much over the last year, and that is the Basel III reclassification of gold. So let's start there. Since Bretton Woods, 1944, the only Tier 1 asset in the world has been United States Treasuries. One could argue a fully escrowed dollar account also would be a Tier 1 asset. As a
can we throw some subprime into that portfolio too? I mean, geez.
Yeah, well, you know, the what passes as collateral these days is certainly a discussion for another day. But absolutely, the Fed has all sorts of toxic assets that they're trying to pass off as collateral and as valued. But when we go back to 44, the agreement was that Treasuries would be the only Tier 1 asset, and it's been that way literally for almost 80 years. And when 2019 rolled around April and the Bank of International Settlements, which is the central banker's central bank, updated gold from a Tier 3 asset, where only 50% of its value was calculated on the balance sheet, to the world's only other Tier 1 asset, I knew something was changing. It was very obvious that the ball was in motion because people at that level, bankers at that level, do not make changes in a vacuum. When they make a once-in-a-80-year change to levitate gold to a status as Tier 1, the only other Tier 1 asset in the world, which, by the way, Google will tell you is a riskless asset. So you got the central banks saying that gold is a riskless asset. And remember, there's a 90% correlation throughout all of time, throughout all of history between gold and silver. As one goes, so does the other. You've probably heard, and your listeners have probably heard, that typically gold goes first and silver goes further. I believe that too. I think what we saw in July with silver moving up $10 in just a week or two is proof positive of that. But I do believe you'll see more of those moves, a linear move, so to speak, not so incrementally moving up. I think silver will move up violently. But when we look at how all of this
Andy,
comes together, yes.
Quick question there. With gold at, let's call it 1900, not what's going to happen, but just your opinion. Where do you think would be an appropriate price for, forget about the Fed and all this stuff, but just with gold at 1900 today, where would be an appropriate price for silver at this point in your mind?
$45 should be, based upon the last 200 years worth of average between gold and silver. That would be around 45 to 1. That's where it's averaged for the past 200 years. Keith Neumeyer, who you know and has been on your show, will tell you that's coming out of the ground is 6 to 1. So if you take $1,900 and you divide it by 6, you get $316 right now. Now, is that realistic? Some would argue that it is, and that the reality that is 5,000 years worth of price history is hard to turn upside down. The revelation that, well, for all of these years, for 5,000 plus years, if you dug a big hole, silver would be 15.5 or 16 times greater, more abundant than the Earth's crust. That's the geological ratio. But what's coming out of the ground now at 6 to 1 is more realistic of what the ratio should be, in the respect that we've talked about silver being found in nature in a form called epithermal, very close to the surface. And so when it's close to the surface, it means you don't even need high sophisticated machinery that we have here in the 21st century that finds this stuff easily. They found that stuff decades ago. And so the big deposits are no longer being found. They were found a long time ago. So when we talk about digging further, spending more energy, and the reality that single-digit gold to silver is coming out of the ground, or silver to gold, rather, is coming out of the ground 6 to 8 to 1, yeah, we are a long ways off from where ultimately we should be. And when we circle back to what has happened with the IMF...
Although, Andy, real quick, before you complete that circle, you mentioned 6 to 1. Ballpark, what rate are people buying gold to silver at? So if someone spends $100,000, what portion of that is gold versus silver, now that you gave us an estimate of how it's coming out of the ground?
Sure. And I've been saying this on your show for the last year. I would argue, and again, I'm saying this just off the top of my head, I don't have any data, but I would say 70 to 80% of every single transaction that we do is people buying silver. Without putting a dollar figure on it, let's just talk, if we do 10 transactions in a day, 7 to 8 of them will be all silver or majority silver. The realization, Chris, that silver is an asset class that is still woefully undervalued in relation to so many things, but in particular gold and, of course, money creation, that people, in large part, from listening to you and others, have been made aware that silver offers a very rare combination of value and upside potential. It's the only asset, to my mind, that is both an industrial metal and an imperative industrial metal at that, and also a metal that has, or an asset that has a rich history as a monetary instrument. And, you look at like copper being fully industrial and gold being mostly fully investment. Silver's right in the middle and offers both. I could see a period of time, Chris, where if that 6 to 1 ratio continues to happen in reality, you will see a rush by the industrials to secure silver because it's inelastic. They need it for their end use product. If you need a thousandth of an ounce of silver for an iPhone or 5 ounces of silver for a solar panel, you need it. And so I think the industrial demand for silver, when the realization that what's coming on the ground is becoming harder and harder and harder to obtain, will add fuel to a fire. and that will be somewhere after silver's made, in my opinion, its first move. Once silver starts to really move, the industrials will say, holy crud, we got to get this stuff or we're in trouble. We're not going to be able to make our solar panels. We're not going to be able to make our textiles. We're not going to be able to make our electronics. So silver is very, very, very necessary in industry, on top of having what I believe is equal on par to gold in terms of its monetary history. So it's a double banger. But again, switching back to your initial question, look, when the Bank of International Settlements, the central bank makes that announcement in 2019, and then you see the IMF call for a new Bretton Woods. Now, I watched the video on their website. It's very cryptic. It's hard to tell what the hell the lady was saying. She talks very eloquently, but says a whole lot of nothing. What I take away from it more than anything is just another piece of the puzzle. Yes.
I know I'm interrupting a bit today, although some of these gems you threw out there. I'd like to take a quick translation. She was saying nothing, although simultaneously saying we're going to print a lot of money. In fact,
correct.
Yeah, you might say, wow, how was he able to translate that so quickly? Although, fortunately, in the last 11 years, I've been developing this decoder ring to simplify things that essentially anytime you hear a politician talk about job creation or a banker talk about stimulus, you can translate it, folks at home, you can just translate all that as we're going to print more money. So with that said,
yeah, I mean,
continue, please.
The one thing I kind of took away from it, it was almost like this group just wants to go to third world countries and further make them indebted. That's kind of what I took away from it.
That's what the IMF does.
Right. And that's kind of what I took away from. We want to go to these areas and get their standard of living up and lend money to them. Well, you put it all together, at least I do, Chris, and I see all these pieces of a puzzle coming together. You got the reclassification of gold by the central banks. You see them massively accumulating it for the last several years. You see the IMF talk about now a new Bretton Woods, which would be a new system. You see on your show the other day, Andrew Maguire talking about China buying silver. You're beginning to see de-dollarization, in my opinion, and that's what we've been seeing for the last couple of years, a move away from the U.S. dollar, not only in terms of its utility, but also in terms of its world reserve status in its present form. Now, does that mean that they come up with a new Fed coin? We're hearing talks of digital wallets. I don't know what it means, but I do believe that what it is signaling above all else is that the dollar bills in our wallets that we call money will be hanging from a frame in the Smithsonian probably pretty soon. And I think we are approaching a crossroads where a new system is on the horizon. And all of these little tidbits that we're getting from the most powerful groups in the world, all speaking of a new system and new asset classes that are considered riskless, etc. These are, I think, the beginnings of a new system. And then you look at the way the governments have reacted to COVID. You look at how it simultaneously blew up all Western economies. I'll tell you something, Chris. I try my hardest not to be conspiratorial. But you put it all together, and it sure seems convenient, the way everything is played out, that a little bug came, shut down the whole world's economies, blew up everyone at the same time, increased debt globally dramatically all at once, and now everyone is talking about a new system. Kind of convenient when you talk about a cashless system. I know that China last week just launched a digital currency. We are beginning to see a new system globally. And what was, I don't think, much longer will be what is.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And although you hit some buzzwords there, and I can't hold back today, conspiracy theory. Now, I find that one an interesting one. I believe I could document how the CIA actually marketed that term to make anyone who counters CIA. Again, a heavily Nazi organized entity, which people can read about Operation Paperclip. There's a great book called The Nazis Next Door, which details with thorough evidence how basically any Nazi that was willing to do whatever the Dulles brothers wanted, they'd wipe the slate clean, bring them in. And I guess it also reminds me, I was reading this book where they talked about the LBJ tapes, and I actually listened to him online the other day. You hear him and J. Edgar Hoover talking about how a real investigation of Kennedy isn't going to help anyone. I mean, you have tapes of these guys basically obstructing justice. So if people want to talk about conspiracy theories, I'd suggest there's plenty of them that are well documented. They're not theory. And then when you get to the woman from the IMF, aside from the fact that she quoted John Maynard Keynes a couple minutes in, which I think tells you all you need to know.
For sure.
I mean, when they're talking about a new Bretton Woods, it's like, huh? Because didn't Bretton Woods end in 1971? I mean, we had this Bretton Woods system, and then essentially the same thing that's happening today, where people realized what the U.S. was doing. Now they were spending money they didn't have. And you saw a run on the gold, which led Nixon to remove us from the gold standard. Now, perhaps, and maybe this is a conspiracy theory, you can tell me, but I'll lay one out here. Maybe because they put someone in like Ben Bernanke, who claims he doesn't understand gold, which I doubt that's true, but maybe he should study what happened post-Bretton Woods. Maybe he should be aware, what is the dollar? The dollar was a measurement of an amount of gold. And, you know, then you have someone who's affecting everyone's life on the planet who claims he doesn't understand it. Then, you know, 10, 15 years after that, you have an IMF official talking about a new Bretton Woods. I don't know. It all seems incredibly silly, to the point where it's like, wow, this is what grown adults are doing. I mean, it's almost like if you just said they were directly stealing from people, at least it'd be a little bit more respectable than what we're getting. And anyway, any thoughts on that? Am I completely off board here? Am I?
Not at all. No, not at all. I mean, I think the MO of the United States is to milk as much as they can out of the system and then make a new system. See, that's why I've been harping on the reclassification of gold, is because I believe that they have used up a lot of their goodwill. And the only way that any central bank who wants to gather demand for their new system, it will have to be pegged so that type of behavior is not allowed. You're going to have, and that's why I keep coming back to a digital currency tethered to gold. It is the only way, in my opinion, that you see acceptance, mass acceptance by the public to accept a new system, a new currency, and I think that's what we will see. And that bodes very well for the price of gold, and probably even better for the price of silver in terms of its percentage gain, as they do have a 90% correlation throughout all of history. And this is why guys like Jim Sinclair have said for a very long time that gold will go to levels that most people think impossible and then never come back down, because it will be pegged. It has to be part of a new system. Things have to come full circle, and I think it will. I think that they will use a very small amount of gold, or rather a very small percentage of a new currency, and tie it to gold, maybe 10%, which still allows them some flexibility. But that 10% tether with custody denoted on a distributed ledger would be enough, I think, for people to say, okay, fine, this time they mean business, and they would start over. But I think those are the things that I take from this, Chris, and I don't think anything you're saying is wrong whatsoever. The U.S. has, for a very long time, taken advantage a wonderful situation for us in this country. We've all enjoyed a standard of living, arguably that was far above what the rest of the world enjoyed because we printed it. And I think when we left the gold standard in 1971, ever since we've been living on borrowed time. You know, last year I gave a presentation at the Sprott conference in Vancouver, and I showed a chart that was issued by J.P. Morgan Private Wealth. I have a client who is a member of J.P. Morgan Private Wealth. This is the division of J.P. Morgan that works with the centimillionaires and the billionaires, their banking division, the wealthiest people in the world. And he sent me a letter that he received in the mail from J.P. Morgan. And in it was a chart going back to the 1400s showing all of the world reserve currencies that have come before the U.S. dollar, and how all of them had a very limited lifespan, typically between 40 and 50 years, and then they're gone. Now, when you look at 1971, we're already past our window of historical precedence. But they said something very alarming in that letter, and it said, "Dear depositor, we believe that you need to mitigate your exposure to the U.S. dollar because it is our belief that the dollar will be challenged for singular world reserve status." Now we look at what China just did last week, developing and launching their first digital currency. Will they tie it to gold? I have a feeling that they will. I think the only way that countries will gain acceptance after everything that the U.S. dollar or the U.S. government has done to the dollar, rather, if you don't have some sort of pegging, no one will ever accept it ever again, and we'll just see a rush towards cryptocurrencies and gold and black markets and off the system. At some point, people just say, screw it, I'm not doing this anymore. And I think we are rapidly approaching that. When you take a look at, a $4 trillion deficit this year that's growing by $600,000 a minute, $100,000, every 10 seconds. It's insane. So these are new realities, Chris, that I think underscore the announcement from the IMF. I think that, people accumulating gold and silver right now represent the last chance, in my opinion, to find real value before the rest of the world catches on to the fact that commodities in general are still undervalued in comparison to every other asset class. Now, stocks and bonds and real estate are also overvalued. It's shocking to me that people haven't noticed commodities sooner. Now, no sooner do I say that than I look and I see grains and natural gas and probably oil on the horizon. These things are beginning to move. You're beginning to see movement in the commodity sector. And I think once the commodities in general break out, which we're right on the doorstep of that, I think big money, the Ray Dalios, the Warren Buffetts, the Ohio Police and Fire Pension, they'll double down and triple down. What is a toe in the water right now? 2.5% allocation from Berkshire Hathaway, 5% allocation from the Ohio Police and Fire Union, a small allocation from Ray Dalio. These guys aren't gold bugs, but they realize that gold and silver must be part of a portfolio. When that realization becomes more convicted and you see a greater participation, I think what we saw in July, Chris, where silver moved up $10 in a week, you will see that in spades, if I had to guess, because it is a very thinly traded market. And, I'm sure I'll go back to being as busy as a one-legged cowboy in an ass-kicking contest when that happens, as I was in July.
There you go.
As I was in July when, the realization became front and center that, hey, silver's moving, I better jump on. Now, luckily for all your listeners and all of my clients and myself too, we've been given another chance. It hasn't continued. It pulled back, and it's up strong today. But one of these days we're going to wake up, if I had to guess, and we're going to see prices that have moved up more than most people expect, and it will just be part of the new reality. It won't come back down. It will continue to move higher because, quite frankly, on an inflation-adjusted perspective, or from an inflation-adjusted perspective, one could argue a $50 silver in 1980, and we're half of that right now. Geez, you could make the argument that silver should be a whole heck of a lot higher. Aside from the 45-to-1 ratio divided by the $1,910 gold, putting it at around $45, it should be a whole heck of a lot higher, Chris. And I think that is in our future.
Well, I thought it was funny. You said you could make the argument silver should be higher. No could about that. I do. Andy, one last final one. Before, I know there's some people are like, all right, funny boy, enough of the comedy. Let's just get a darn silver special so I can get the stuff. But before we get that, I have a question. It popped into my mind. And if you get me that birthday present I've always wanted of allowing me to submit a question at the next presidential debate, what I would like to know is that, would you say that if post-election, if we took Bernie Madoff out of prison and installed him as the Federal Reserve chairman, would that make the Fed more transparent and honest than currently constituted?
Well, J.P. Morgan was the bank for Bernie Madoff, and rumor has it that Jerome Powell has a direct line into Bernie's cell. So I'm not so convinced.
No, you're not fooling with me.
No, I just read that. I just read that, seriously. I just read that in the tea leaves this morning. When
Jamie Dimon has a direct line into Bernie Madoff's prison cell?
Through him and Jerome Powell. They actually have a conference call every Friday, I believe, at tea time. Yes. What the Federal Reserve is doing and has done, and what the IMF and the Bank of International Settlements, the playbook has already been drawn up. How it plays out is anyone's guess. I will certainly never call the politicians transparent. When you look at the IMF announcement, Chris, when you look at the Basel III agreement, when you look at the fact that all the stuff going on with Joe and Hunter Biden that you see on Fox, things that a lot of people should know, very few do know. You can talk mainstream, like Joe and Hunter Biden's meddling in bribery scandal that's going on right now. No one talks about because it's only Fox talking about it. Or you can take a step further and look at something bigger, and look at something like the IMF announcement or the Basel III agreement. I talk to people, financial advisors. I have a friend who works for UBS. He manages hundreds of millions of dollars. He never even heard of Basel III. Has no idea the IMF is calling for a new standard. So the dissemination of information is poor at best. And people need to wake up and realize that these things that we're talking about is a shred of transparency. They leave crumbs on the way to on the way back from Hansel and Gretel's house. They leave trails. They leave a path if you're able to discern it. And that's really what I take away from the IMF announcement and from the Basel III agreement. These are all crumbs on a path to their agenda. And so they can look back and say, well, we told you. Well, the problem is not many people are telling us. The media doesn't tell us. You got to dig. You got to listen to alternative sources like you. When you bring on guys like Andrew Maguire, these are people who are telling things that everyone should be listening to, that China is all of a sudden, for the first time in his career, buying silver. That's enormous. That's huge news, and no one talks about it but you and Andrew Maguire. What you are doing for the public is hugely valuable, and I hope you realize that. I really do, because, I'm paying attention, and I use it for what I believe is super, super important information, because if all you do is listen to the mainstream, there's no transparency. But if you dig, you'll find the crumbs. And what Andrew said on your show last week is prime example. The Chinese would not be gobbling up silver the way that they are. They would not be gobbling up gold the way that they are. They would not be issuing a digital currency the way that they are if things weren't about to change. Nor would the IMF call for a new Bretton Woods, nor would the Bank of International Settlements levitate gold as the only other Tier 1 asset. These are all very big clues and crumbs on the way to a new system. And I think that that's what I take away from all of this, Chris, more than anything, that we're living on borrowed time on a system that was. There'll be something new pretty soon.
Well, Andy, I appreciate that. And that's why I gave away the decoder ring for free, that if you see a politician or a central banker on your TV, you can just hit the mute button. You'll know they're talking about printing more money, spending stuff they don't have, taking it from you, the listener, and which is not ideal, perhaps, although, Andy, we got any silver specials this week for people who are interested in buying silver? I might add, maybe next week we could get a special if anyone, I don't know, I want to take someone's silver, but if I know you are happy to buy metals as well. What do you got for us this week?
Yeah, so I'm just gonna keep two specials going this week that we had last week. I'm going to keep them going this week. I have enough supply, and they've really had a lot of demand. We're going to do the 2020 Eagle at $4.79 over spot, and the Austrian Vienna Philharmonic, I'm going to drop it by 6 cents I'm going to drop it by 10 cents from $3.79 to $3.69 over. So we have the Austrian Vienna Philharmonic at $3.69 over, and we have the 2020 Silver Eagle at $4.79 over. Chris, these premiums are higher than I'm used to in my career, going back the last 20 plus years. But they're half of what they were earlier this year. Question is, do we see a massive amount of demand into the end of the year? I'll tell you this. Here's my prediction into the end of the year, brother. And I hope this doesn't happen. I sometimes make these predictions and people say he wants Biden to win. I think if Biden wins, you're going to see chaos in December. If he is going to raise the capital gains taxes, and I were a big investor with lots of money in stock market, which most people are sitting on gains, let's say. If I'm sitting on capital gains in a market at all-time highs with 50 million people unemployed and capital gains are going to be jacked up in January, gee, I wonder what I'm going to do in December. I could see market carnage in December if that happens. And I think people need to be nimble and maybe get a little bit of silver that they were thinking about buying right now before the election results come in, because that's the type of catalyst that could very quickly catapult metals higher than people are comfortable with accumulating. Now, I'm not making a prediction as to who's going to win, but I will simply say that either way the price goes higher. If Joe wins, I think it goes higher faster. So we're going to keep the special intact. And remember, on the Silver Eagle, the 2020, that's the last year before a new design comes out. They've already issued a new design. It's a really cool-looking coin. I saw it the other day. But this is the end of an era in the Silver Eagle. It has been since 1986, one design. This is the last year. I've had a lot of people, who have been collecting this last year issue, feeling that it will have some sort of collector value, not only to remember what a crazy year 2020 was, but also because it is the last issue or the last issue of a old design that is 23 years old, 24 years old. So anyways, that's what we're going to do. And Chris, I really enjoy talking with you on these weekly shows, and I appreciate the opportunity. I wish you safe travels wherever you're heading to now, and look forward to catching up with you wherever you end up sometime next week.
Well, I appreciate that. And again, you let me know if I have this right. $3.69 over spot on Philharmonics, $479 over spot on 2020 American Eagles. And folks can find out by emailing arcadia@milesfranklin.com. Does that sound right?
Yes, sir, that does. And as always, and I'm proud of this, a portion of every sale we do is donated back to Arcadia to help you continue doing what you're doing, because I, for one, find it to be incredibly valuable. And just listening to Andrew McGuire's two-part interview last week while I was working out, to me, was completely and totally valuable. To hear that the Chinese are accumulating silver for the first time in his career on a massive scale, that's about as relevant as it gets. This is another piece to the puzzle.
No, Andy, that is not as relevant as it gets, because what's even more relevant is that you're getting an extra pump on in your bicep curls while you listen to Andrew McGuire talk about China buying silver. And fortunately, folks at home, you don't even have to type anything in, because if you want to get your workout onto some Andrew McGuire and China silver talk, it is coming your way now.